Hello, it is Ryan, and I was on a flight the other day playing one of my favorite social spin slot games on ChumbaCasino.com. I looked over at the person sitting next to me, and you know what they were doing? They were also playing Chumba Casino. Coincidence? I think not. Everybody's loving having fun with it. Chumba Casino is home to hundreds of casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere, even at 30,000 feet. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com to claim your free welcome bonus. That's ChumbaCasino.com and live the Chumba life.
No purchase necessary. VGW. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Caesar's Palace for 12 rounds of boxing. In the red corner, from Los Angeles, California, wearing the red trunks with the gold trim, weighing in at 125 pounds, the lightweight champion of the world, Danny Little Red Lopez. Well, Bill, our winners get a home theater receiver. That's right. Experience the full potential of high-definition video with this 72-channel digital home theater receiver from Yamaha. But wait, that's not all. They also get a 5.1-channel surround sound system from Mirage. With 5 palm-sized speakers and a compact subwoofer cube, the MX 5.1 brings you huge immersive sound with Mirage's omnipolar technology. All from the Spiegel catalog, Chicago, Illinois, 60609. And they're taking closer order as down the stretch they come. Mr. Hot Stuff has 3 lengths to make up with chocolate candy last. On the rail, take the points behind that gallant son with chocolate candy gaining on the outside. In the lead is Pioneer of the Nile being tackled by chocolate candy. They're neck and neck as they come to the wire. And Pioneer of the Nile holds off chocolate candy and wins the Santa Anita Derby. And now, on your feet, time to greet holder of 14 NBA titles, your home team, your Los Angeles Lakers. Number 3 at 6'8", 5th year out of UCLA, playing forward, Trevor Ariza. Starting at center, number 17 at 7 feet, 4th year out of St. Andrews High School, Andrew Bynum. And at guard, number 24, 6'6", 13th season out of Loyal Marion High School, Kobe Bryant.
I have a friend who told me this the other day. He said public bathrooms should not be separated by gender. They should be separated by penis size. I said, okay, how does that work? He said, you have one bathroom just for people with small penises and no penises, and then another bathroom just for people with big penises. I said, all right, the thing is, they tried that. It was called segregation.
Good morning. It's Saturday, Rules Saturday, March the 29th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the patriotic song of the day, we will have no free lunch, effective interpersonal communication, rules for retrogrades, the sovereign child, motivation, meditation, and rules for patriots. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I should not change, the courage to change the things I should, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen.
くしようおみさんこちらほら手のなる方へ子供つまり革命アジェンダそれじゃあまたなしでこの指止まらんか
Thank you. And now there's no free lunch. 250 Economic Truths by David Bahnsen.
Many businesses with unpopular products or inefficient production find it much easier to curry the favor of a few influential politicians or a government agency than to compete in the open market. Charles G. Koch. This is actually the essence of crony capitalism. It rarely starts with a corrupt politician looking for a favored business to support, but almost always starts with a deficient business looking for a corrupt politician to aid in its own corruption. Such alliances are easier to form than business savvy is to develop, and often the use of government and rent-seeking to stifle competition is itself considered its own savvy, and it is confused for real enterprise and competitive advantage.
And that was There's No Free Lunch by David Bahnsen. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now a new book, and I'm replacing Rules for Anti-Radicals because it's not very rule-oriented. I thought it was going to have more real rules in it. But anyway, I'm replacing with the Effective Interpersonal Communications because this is really getting to the heart of what it is that I'm trying to communicate here in terms of being able to defeat people that are not acting in good faith. No matter what you call them, I don't care if you want to call them psychopaths or left-wing or socialist or moderates or whatever. If a person is not acting in good faith, they are your opponent / enemy. So in this book, they're telling you how to deal with conversational tricks. Every chapter covers a new trick, and they've got 22 chapters in here, and they're called methods, so instead of chapters. So method 1 is repeat. Method 2, backfire. Method 3, politicians dodge and drag. Method 4, direct method. Method 5, beautify. Method 6, close. Method 7, criticize/question. Method 8, reverse. Method 9, compare. Method 10, give background. Method 11, sweet sandwich. Method 12, sour sandwich. Method 13, present the alternative. Method 14, present the statistics. Method 15, mock. Method 16, good humor. Method 17, the flamboyant flatterer. Method 18, narrow the topic. Method 19, normalize. Method 20, play dumb. Method 21, lure, then snare. And method 22, ask them what they want. So, the introduction. As a human, you will definitely have come across more than one situation where you struggled to come up with an answer to an unfair comment from someone, only to realize later what you could have said. Whether it's getting pushed back in a shop printer queue by somebody claiming to have urgent business, or getting refused a discount where other people got one just because they were more insistent, or somebody accusing you of being rude when they were the ones who started being rude, you will have faced multiple situations in daily life where not being able to stand up for yourself left you feeling hurt and regretful. Even in situations where we are in the wrong, we are often unwilling to accept our mistakes. Of course, if the fault is within ourselves, we need to correct ourselves. However, that discussion would require another book. The focus of this book is, what if the other person is wrong? What if we get accused of being wrong unjustly? How do we react if the person we saw throwing garbage in the street accuses us of throwing garbage in front of a dozen other people? What if somebody asks us a question and we don't know the answer? What should we do if we offer a person a solution to their problem, but they come up with some lame excuse and ask us to do their job for them instead? To all these questions, we should have better solutions than at least animals. Animals can use a combination of sounds and gestures to mean different things. However, they cannot arrange sounds in different variations to make words as humans do. They cannot create new words to describe new phenomena. If they cannot explain something simply by gestures, they resort to violence. The reason we humans have been able to adopt and evolve different aspects of knowledge, skills, and inventions is because of our ability to develop language. This ability continues to play a central role in helping humans adapt to different environments and make technological advances. By the use of both oral and written communication, we have managed to transmit an ever-growing set of knowledge and technologies to our future generations. As humans triumphed over all species of animals due to the use of language and superior communication skills, is it a stretch to say that the most successful among humans would be the people who communicate their needs, desires, and opinions with others most effectively? As the supreme species, shouldn't we know the answers to such basic questions as what we need and why we need it? What problems do we have and how to resolve them? What is somebody saying to us, and what do they hope to achieve by saying it? How do we respond to somebody in the most effective and beneficial way? However, sometimes answering even such simple questions as these becomes difficult. In such situations, our immediate instinct is to defend ourselves. You are due to take your mother to a hospital appointment. Just before that, you go out in the garden to take a walk. When you return inside, your mother is upset. She says, "Where were you? I called you so many times. You know we have an appointment, and you choose to hide right at that time. Now you'll make me late for my appointment. I don't like being late for appointments. You know your mother is getting ready. You could have stayed here, so I'm not worried, wondering where has my son disappeared right at the time of the appointment. You become rude and snappy and start shouting and treating everyone around you meanly. This is because you feel something is wrong with what your mother is saying, but you don't know what. You want to defend yourself, but you don't know how and from what. Or maybe you know you are in the wrong, but you simply don't know how to apologize without feeling humiliated. In such situations, what we need to learn is to control our instincts. We shouldn't let our emotions control our minds and play with our tongues through them. We should think calmly about the answer to the following 3 questions. What the other person has said, why did they say it, how best should we respond to it? We have to carry the debate in a constructive way. Any of the communication debate methods I mention in this book may be used either positively to resolve a dispute or negatively to argue mindlessly and illogically. However, I have largely tried to avoid going into negative methods such as insulting or shouting. Such methods may be effective at times, but they not only go against Confucius's golden rule of morality, don't like for others what you don't like for yourself, which I hold in high esteem, but they also diminish your stature in front of others, especially when you're involved in a public debate where there are a lot of third-party eyes on you. I mentioned earlier the examples of you being angry at being scolded by your mother, but knowing how to effectively argue and debate with people is a skill that is needed whether or not you are angry. It is not enough to think you would deal with situations as they arise, especially if you are not in the habit of having difficult conversations. One of the places where communication is the decisive weapon in the field is a job interview. You cannot force the interviewer to give you the job. You have to convince him. You have to be very careful as to what you say, how you say it, and how much you say. You cannot say too little or too much. You have to win the interviewer's approval by not only proving yourself to be worthy of the job, but also by giving the interviewer a good impression of yourself as a person overall. Here's a transcript of an interview of 2 graduates, Trevor and John, who applied for the job of customer service representative at a company. The names of the people in the universities have been changed for discretion. The interviewer first calls Trevor from the waiting room. Trevor enters the interview room. Without looking anywhere, he silently sits in the offered chair. Interviewer: Hello, Trevor. How are you? Trevor: Interviewer: So, Trevor, tell us a bit about yourself. Trevor: I don't understand. What should I say? Interviewer: Say anything, like, what do you do? How many brothers or sisters do you have? Where do you study? Trevor: I have 2 brothers and sisters, and I studied at Howdy University of Technology. Interviewer, after a pause: That's it? Nothing else? After a further pause: What are your hobbies? Trevor: I read books, watch movies, and play computer games. Interviewer: What types of books do you read? Trevor: Science and novels. Interviewer: Share your views on the latest book you read. Trevor: The latest book I read is called Animals of the Antarctic. It describes the various animals of Antarctica. I like to read about penguins and seals. Interviewer: Trevor: Why do you want to do this job? Trevor: To earn money. Interviewer: Very well, Trevor, you may go. Next, John enters the interview room. He takes in his surroundings and then smiles at the interviewer. Hello, John. Hello, sir. How are you? Interviewer: I'm fine, thank God. And you? John: I'm fine too. Interviewer: So, John, tell us a bit about yourself. John: I am John Creevy. I graduated in accountancy from Jagpaw University this year. I'm looking forward to kickstarting my career in a respectable company. I like challenging myself both mentally and physically and would like a job where I learn new things as I go. Interviewer: What are your hobbies? John: I like doing research. I watch movies and play football. Interviewer: What type of research do you do? John: I research topics that intrigue me and seem mysterious. I usually like to research life hacks and psychology. Interviewer: Can you tell me about a psychological concept that particularly intrigues you? John: There are several very different psychological patterns. One of the ones that particularly intrigue me is psychopathy. The layman thinks of psychopaths as simply being crazy, yet psychopaths, on the contrary, are very intelligent. Craziness doesn't have one type of degree, rather there are several different psychological disorders. The reason psychopathy intrigues me is not so much the psychopath's inhumaneness, but how they have total control over their emotions. They don't suffer through guilt and fear as ordinary people do. That is the reason, when given the right circumstances, they can become rather successful in a perfectly legal way. Interviewer: you've given me a nice explanation, John. Now tell me, is there any particular reason why you have applied for this job? John: you might have already guessed it. This job gives me lots of chances to interact with people firsthand and learn about their psychologies practically. Now, who do you think the interviewer will select for the job? Trevor or John? And that's the first half of the preface of the book Interpersonal Communications. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, rules for retrogrades.
Rule 26. The retrograde must use Saul Alinsky's shrewdest, trickiest rules for radicals against the radicals themselves. We will examine how to specifically reverse two of his rules, 4 and 13. Respectively, these two rules read: make the enemy live up to his own book of rules, and pick the target, freeze it, personalize it, and polarize it. First, let's polarize Alinsky's Rule 4. Make the enemy live up to his own book of rules. Alinsky admits openly that he was inspired, naturally or supernaturally, by the tactics of the devil, who simply cherishes the contempt of hypocrisy. According to both scripture and tradition, Lucifer was and is fascinated by both the concept and the implementation of hypocrisy, employing it wherever opportune on his own behalf and pointing it out in others whenever expedient, which of course indicates his implementation of a sort of meta-hypocrisy, a hypocrisy within hypocrisy. No surprise, then, that Alinsky's favorite tactic involved decrying hypocrisy and anything else looking like hypocrisy in his political opponents. Every American general election cycle, radicals across the land furiously forage the political landscape for any and all indicia of the slightest instance of hypocrisy by the religious right, which they find, of course, since all humans make mistakes. What's truly diabolic in this modus operandi is the startling consequence that Americans have generally given purchase to the radical lie that an act of hypocrisy by Party A equates to an automatic score for his rival, Party B. Naturally, the consequence of unintelligent voter behavior continues to incentivize radicals to weaponize hypocrisy. We must turn the tide by making radicals meet muster, a double twist to be sure. In other words, force the enemy to live up to his own rules, about enemies living up to their own rules. In order to accomplish this, Christians must become more adept at weaponizing the radical concept of equality. Radical impunity against Christians, in the name of equality, violates justice. Retrogrades must resolve this abuse of so-called equality for themselves. For example, consider the radical community organizing effort from 2012 until 2017 that resulted in the temporary coercion of Christian bakers in Colorado to produce cakes for celebrants of homosexual civil unions, until the Court of Appeals holding was overturned in the Supreme Court in 2018 in favor of the bakeries. Supposedly value-neutral jurisprudence in America, such as the decidedly anti-Christian holding by the Court of Appeals, has never actually been neutral, notwithstanding its claims. Without other opinions, the retrograde must negate the enemy's legal tactics culturally. He must do this by showing that, one way or another, an immoral application of one of the rules for radicals against a Christian can easily be weaponized by that same Christian. In the absence of an eventual overturn by the Supreme Court, Christian bakers might have ironically employed Alinsky's Rule 4 by posting signs in their bakeries saying, "All profits from wedding cakes for homosexual civil unions will be diverted exclusively to heteronormative religious causes." This would classify as a defensive tactic, as it rebuffs prospectively against enforceable requests by homosexuals for wedding cakes. Sure enough, between 2012 and 2017, Christian cake shops might have been legally required to violate their Christian scruples, but this way, at least they could use the profits to strike against the very occasion of the radicals' oppression. More importantly, their signs would likely have deterred homosexuals from requesting, i.e. requiring, them to provide such cakes. The radical insistence on a certain type of equality under the law would, in that case, work in favor of Christians for once. The Christian baker would have successfully reversed Alinsky's Rule 4, even in the face of legal defeat. Alinsky's Rule 13, being offensive rather than defensive, allows for a more aggressive response to the same circumstances. Pick the target, freeze it, personalize it, and polarize it. Operating on the basis of Rule 13 from 2012 until 2017, the retrograde might have struck back, locating and then patronizing bakeries run by radical anti-Christian homosexualists and forcibly requesting Christian and heteronormative-themed wedding cakes. This would be the retrograde's more ambitious way of affirming the exclusivity of man-woman marriages. Pick the target, i.e. an opposition bakery, personalize the message, and polarize what they attempted to do to Christians. The radical left won't live and let live, so why should we? Forcible viewpoint discrimination in the realm of baker harassment cuts both ways, after all. The retrograde must see to it that it does. While the Supreme Court eventually rendered the issue moot in 2018, the hot-button issue of Christian bakeries and homosexual wedding cakes provided an excellent opportunity to exercise the retrograde's moral imagination. It will prove both necessary and worthwhile to anticipate what retrogrades may do, defensively and offensively, in a foreseeable day to come, when the ultimate holding may not be as innocuous to Christians as that rendered by Masterpiece Cake Shop versus Colorado Civil Rights Commission 2018. In practice, abiding this rule of Alinsky's 13 serves to cross-reference the rule for retrogrades enjoying a perennial offensive counterattack. The reader can plainly see how much more effective the offensive application of Alinsky's rules are than the defensive. Once more, always be on offense.
And that was Rule 26 from Rules for Retrogrades, 40 Tactics to Defeat the Radical Left by Timothy J. and David R. Gordon. And I wanted to say that what he stumbled onto here is one of the tactics or tricks that the left likes to play is what is called the false dichotomy. They want to put you in a position where you think that there's only two solutions to the problem and both of them suck. The author was able to find a third way. Instead of having to say, well, in order to stand up for my principles, I have to, in essence, discriminate against this couple, he found a way to get out of that conundrum by using the idea of posting a sign up there that says, that he's going to use money for any cakes for same-sex marriages for promoting heteronormative laws, etc. Okay? But the point is he found a third way. Same thing that I've done with dealing with street people. I give them a bottle of water. Back in a minute. Thank you. So now a new book, it's called The Sovereign Child, and it's a how-to book on parenting, written by a lefty for lefties. And I'm going to give you the contents before we get into the preface of this so that you get an idea of what we're dealing with here. Chapter 1, eating what they want. 2, sleeping when they want. 3, watching what they want, screens in parentheses. 4, the 4 problems with rules. 5, parenting without rules. 6, counter-arguments. 7, more examples. 8, siblings. 9, steering the family from the rules-based to rules-free. 10, philosophical underpinnings. 11, past and future. And then the epilogue. So this is the preface. This book is inspired by a philosophy of parenting called taking children seriously, a non-coercive parenting movement that was co-founded by Sarah Fitz-Claridge and David Deutsch and was prominent in the United Kingdom in the 1990s. At the time, Fitz-Claridge was pursuing the radical idea that it was possible to raise a child with zero coercion. She familiarized herself with various schools of thought on children and parenting, but found that none of them fully measured up. Eventually, she happened upon an unlikely collaborator who lived in her city, Oxford physicist David Deutsch. Deutsch is a world-renowned thinker for, among other things, establishing the theoretical groundwork for quantum computing. In addition to physics, Deutsch was attracted to philosophy, and in particular, the philosophy of Karl Popper. In subsequent years, Deutsch added to Popper's work in epistemology, personal identity, morality, and aesthetics, all of which are detailed in his 2 books, The Fabric of Reality and The Beginning of Infinity. Deutsch's view on personhood aligned with Fitz-Claridge's intuitions about childhood freedom, and the 2 of them started a movement promoting a radically non-coercive approach to parenting. Fitz-Claridge went to conferences and met with parenting and schooling groups, and she organized a print journal called Taking Children Seriously. They had thousands of paid subscribers at its peak. The movement lost steam in the 2000s, but the content of the journals remained online as a half-functioning web forum where I stumbled upon it in 2018, just in time for the birth of my first child. 6 years later, my wife and I have been applying this philosophy with all of our 5 kids. We consider ourselves enormously lucky to have encountered these ideas, and the purpose of this book is to share them with others. What is taking children seriously? The simplest way to describe taking children seriously is to describe what it is not. Taking children seriously avoids 2 questions that frame almost every other school of thought on parenting. 1. What are the necessary limitations, restrictions, or boundaries for kids? Where should the parent draw the line on what is allowed and disallowed? 2. How do parents enforce these lines, limits, and expectations? Should they use harsh words, positive reinforcement, timeouts, confiscations, bribes, or breathing techniques? Taking children seriously steps away from all of this. It has no interest in what the best rules should be or how to enforce them because it has no interest in rules. When most people hear this, the first reaction is to assume taking children seriously is a fancy version of complete permissiveness, a well-known and ancient parenting style otherwise known as neglect. Rest assured, taking children seriously is not neglect. So what is it? Instead of focusing on rules, taking children seriously focuses on fostering understanding. Parenting is the process of supporting a child until they understand the world well enough that they can support themselves. What is the best way to foster understanding? To provide freedom and security for a person's creativity to discover how the world works. Rules limit freedom, enhance understanding, and therefore impair the parenting project. This book is inspired by the themes in The Sovereign Individual by James Dale Davidson and William Rees-Mogg. Unlike the self-sovereignty that Davidson and Rees-Mogg outline, which requires huge society-wide innovation, the self-sovereignty we might unlock for children can take root in any home, anywhere, by anyone of any financial status. The sovereign child doesn't have to wait for anything except a curious parent. Chapter 1 begins with freedom around food. Then chapters 2 and 3 move on to sleep and screens. Chapter 4 takes an extended look at the problems with enforcing rules in general. Chapter 5 presents problem solving as the formal alternative to rules. Chapter 6 addresses the counter-arguments. Chapter 7 presents various additional applications of the philosophy to daily life. Chapter 8 takes siblings seriously. Chapter 9 offers ideas for shifting from rules-based parenting to problem-solving-based parenting. Chapter 10 presents the philosophy of knowledge, the epistemology that underlines the entire book. Readers who prefer to start with the foundations are encouraged to begin here. Chapter 11 closes the book with an expansive view of parenting in the ancient past and distant future. And that was the preface from the book, The Sovereign Child. And you should read, or I'm going to read this book, but listen to it and thinking about some of the stories that you hear in the news about children these days. One of the stories I heard recently that was the motive for me to go and look for a book like this was about furry children. There's some type of a so-called movement called the furry movement, where people dress up like animals and act like animals. So there's a school district that had banned children from doing this. Apparently, some children were dressing up like animals, acting like animals at school. And I heard about this on the radio, and the radio host was talking as though this must be some kind of benign neglect on the part of the parents, that they were just so busy that their children slipped out the back door with this furry costume on, and they didn't know it until later on. And now, when you read this book, and I'm sure there's others like it, The Sovereign Child, you realize, no, this is deliberate. These are parents that are either encouraging the child to do this, or when the child comes to them and says, guess what, I'm going to go furry tomorrow, the parent says, okay, fine. Basically, this parenting style is called hitting every pothole, learning by hitting every pothole in the road. And the idea is to strip children of the advantages that parents are supposed to give them. This is another equity. The idea of this, again, is equity. I suppose they probably even think this comes down to racial standpoints, with the idea that white children grow up with advantages no one else gets. And it starts in childhood with parenting, and the parenting giving these children advantages that they shouldn't have and or don't deserve. So that's something you need to keep in mind as I'm reading this book. But that's it for right now. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now a little bit of motivation.
Working on yourself, talking to yourself. That's so very important. Overcoming the negative conversation, that inner dialogue that's going on all the time. Even when you don't want it to be there. You can't stop yourself right now from thinking. You can't do it. It's going on. And so learning how to empower yourself, part of doing that is standing up to yourself. You got to stand up inside yourself sometimes and say, shut up. I was going to give a presentation, and this voice inside of me saying, you can't do this. You don't have everything it takes. Shut up. I'm behind on my bills, and you're telling me what I can't do. I have got to do it. You'll get scared sometimes. Your mind will go blank on you. Some people you will allow to unnerve you, and you wonder, what's wrong with me? I'm not crazy. That's why you've got to learn to make a conscious, deliberate, determined effort to stand up inside yourself. Working on yourself, watching that inner dialogue, it will determine the quality of your life.
I don't know what that dream is that you have. I don't care how far-fetched it might appear to be. I don't care how disappointing it might have been as you've been working toward that dream. But here's what I know, that dream that you're holding in your mind, that it's possible. See, sometimes we can't say, I can do that. But what we can say, that it's possible.
If you want to become successful in life, young man, he said, number one, you got to change your mindset. He said, you don't get in life what you want, you get in life what you are. Number 2, practice OQP, only quality people. And the third thing is that develop your communication skills, because once you open your mouth, you tell the world who you are.
I want you to be able to say something to yourself that will enable you to maintain a level of integrity with yourself. That when you say this, even when you face tremendous setbacks, it will be a benchmark to keep you in the game, to keep you moving forward and experimenting and readjusting your strategy and your plan of action, continuously looking for ways to win. So what is that something? When you got an idea, you want to move on. You might not have the money. You might not have the education. You might not have the support or the resources you need. What is that something that can keep us going, that will enable us to act on our dream? What's one of those keys that will begin to help us to discover the secrets to our dream? Just say to yourself every day, it's possible. Just say that every day to yourself, it's possible. I choose not to be a common man. It's my right to be uncommon if I can. I seek opportunity, not security. I do not wish to be a kept citizen, humbled and dull by having the state look after me. I want to take the calculated risk, to dream and to build, to fail and to succeed. I refuse to live from hand to mouth. I prefer the challenges of life to the guaranteed existence, the thrill of fulfillment to the stale calm of utopia. I will never cower before any master, nor bend to any threat. It's my heritage to stand erect, proud and unafraid, to face the world boldly and say, this I have done. But I didn't start off like that.
And that's a little bit of motivation. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now a little bit of meditation. And that was a little bit of meditation. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now a little bit of Varney and Company from yesterday.
Joined together from The Who, the great Roger Daltrey and gang, as you look down 6th Avenue, Midtown Manhattan, on a nice sunny day. It's going to be a great weekend in the Northeast, so get out and enjoy spring fever. It is 11 a.m. on the East Coast on this Friday, March the 28th. I'm Ashley Webster, filling in today for Stu Varney. Let's take a look at these markets for you. We've been down since the opening bell, and we've gained some more downward momentum. The Dow off 563 points, down 1.33%. S&P down 1.5%. NASDAQ down 2%. Definitely selling, a lot more selling than buying today. Let's take a look at those big tech names, all moving lower in this environment. Apple down 1.5%, Microsoft down 2%, Amazon the biggest loser on that list, Amazon.com down 3.5%. And take a look at the 10-year Treasury yield. You'd expect it to go higher because of what the big tech names are doing, but no, the Treasury yield down 8 basis points now at 4.28%. All right. Now let's take a look at this op-ed in the Wall Street Journal. It reads, "The world's too deliberate body. How long are Senate Republicans going to let that tax tea cool in their saucer?" I love it. Kimberly Strassel wrote that, and guess what? She joins us this morning.
So there you go. Varney and Company. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now the last few paragraphs of an article in the Washington Examiner. Conservatives are seizing the means of cultural production. Maybe we ceded the culture because ceding ground to the left was the right's favorite hobby for many years. When people would wonder why the right doesn't march in the streets like the left does, because we have jobs and families, and the losers on the left don't. They've got nowhere to be during the day, so they might as well loot a few stores and burn down a few buildings. Besides, if you go too far, you end up in solitary confinement for 20 years because you sat at Nancy Pelosi's desk for 5 minutes. Overt political actions don't really come naturally to someone who has more conservative tendencies, and neither do overt creative endeavors. There aren't a lot of right-wing parents who are going to encourage their children to follow their dreams and become poets or playwrights. In this economy, after paying for college, you better go out and get a job, son. You can write your limericks and do your little doodles on your own time. The most important rule of making new culture and art, whatever it is this. The product itself doesn't have to be an explicitly political project that is right-wing or conservative. In fact, it shouldn't be. Instead, it should be simply the truthful, beautiful, enlightening, and lasting product. Art in general should reject politics if it wants to have a real and lasting impact. You can't create new classics if they are riddled with the political trends of the current moment. Only by rejecting political whims can any art not immediately become obsolete. Therefore, it is not about creating right-wing art. Instead, it's about unleashing the talents of right-wing or even politically neutral artists and creators. Instead of nurturing artists as activists, we need to nurture artists as artists. Any artistic renewal should not just be to please core audiences. It should be also to identify creative talent and nurture it before it is lost, before people give up. It's not just about championing excellence, it's also about championing our people. Now that the means of cultural production have been officially seized, it's time for us to replant our fallow fields with seeds that will grow robust crops of talent and untold cultural riches. And that's an article written by Peachy Keenan, who's a writer and a mother in L.A. But what she misses here, well, almost completely, she has a little segment in here where should simply be truthful, beautiful, enlightening, and lasting. That's correct. But the rest of it is, she misses the point, which conservatives have a tendency to do. The point is, and that's why I'm the only true conservative in the United States today, is because I don't miss the point. The whole point of art for the left is to use it as, and culture is to use it as a way of furthering their revolutionary ambitions. So they want to subvert art and use it for subversive purposes. And the way they do that is by art is supposed to be something beautiful, and that's where it's going to be of lasting value that she's talking about. But the left wants to create ugliness and do so as a source of friction, cultural friction, so that it will then lead to some kind of socialist revolution. And if we're going to go ahead and take control of the culture in this country, one of the things that we have to do is to emphasize beauty. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Chapter 6 of Rules for Patriots.
Chapter 6, Commandment number 5. Reverse the premise of your opponent's argument and use it against him. How many times have you watched the presidential debates in the post-Reagan years with your hands half covering your eyes, just dreading that moment when that gotcha question comes our guy's way? You can almost sense it coming too, can't you? Just when our guy seems to have the momentum and a head of steam, you know the liberal media member pretending to be an impartial moderator is going to drop the proverbial hammer right on our heads. Come on. I can't be the only grassroots conservative out there who has experienced this level of angst watching these things. Be honest with me now. Don't leave me hanging. That's what I thought. I mean, heaven forbid our Republican champion actually has the worldview and shrewd communication skills to turn the question to his advantage. I mean, we're only running for the highest office in the land here, so it's not like we should expect the best of the best to represent us or anything. At this point, our expectations are so low, we'd settle for our Republican champion to just stop ceding even more ground to the left, let alone taking some back. Too often while watching the campaigns of establishment candidates, our guy actually tries to get to the left of the questioner instead of standing up to him. For instance, you knew the 2008 campaign was over when John McCain mavericked himself all the way to the left of Barack Obama during the bailout, even going so far in one presidential debate as to call for the taxpayers to buy off all the bad home loan debt on top of paying off the TARP. I'm guessing I wasn't the only conservative who was throwing things and screaming words a Christian man should never say at the television screen as Obama got to scold McCain for demanding too much from the taxpayers on national television. We've already written about not accepting the premise of your opponent, but the next step to winning requires borrowing a technique from the martial arts, using your opponent's strength against him. In political combat, we do that by first rejecting your opponent's premise, and then we reverse his premise and we use it against him. Or as Shakespeare put it in Hamlet, to hoist someone from his own petard. Now, Reagan was a Jedi master of this technique. Here are just a couple of many famous examples. During a 1984 presidential debate with Walter Mondale, Reagan responded to mounting criticism he was too old to be president by promising he would not, quote, make his opponent's youth and inexperience an issue in this campaign. That snarky retort even drew a laugh from Mondale himself. At a press conference during his first term, ABC News chief White House correspondent Sam Donaldson asked Reagan if all the blame for the recession at the time rested alone with the Democrat-controlled Congress. Mr. Reagan, does any of the blame belong to you? Donaldson asked the president. Without skipping a beat, Reagan winsomely replied, yes, because for many years, I was a Democrat. While there may never be another Reagan, Texas Senator Ted Cruz looks like the closest thing we've had since, there is no reason why we can't do a better job of hoisting the opposition from its own petard. But to do so requires some of that 3D thinking I referred to in the introduction. You cannot successfully reverse your opponent's premise if you accept it. And unless you know why you believe what you believe, you will accept your opponent's premise more times than not. In the first Reagan example we just cited, notice he rejects the premise outright that he's too old for the job. So instead of arguing his qualifications, he makes a crack, undercutting the qualifications of his opponent. But Steve, some of you will say, aren't we tired of politicians who won't answer the question they were asked? Yes, But if the premise of the question is flawed, you should never dignify it with an answer. Gotcha questions with no attempt to address anything substantive are the left's version of, did you beat your wife last night? Once you start going down that rabbit trail, you end up chasing your own tail. Instead, you need to reverse the premise and put them on the defensive. Let them know that it ain't no fun when the rabbit's got the gun. On the other hand, you also don't want to come across as evasive, which is why reversing the premise and using it against them is so key. You're turning the argument of your opponent around on them to demonstrate the total lack of substance and merit of their argument. In the second aforementioned Reagan example, he utilizes the second dimension of our 3D thinking perfectly, which is know why others believe what they believe. Reagan knew that Donaldson was a liberal. Therefore, Reagan knew that Donaldson was just looking for a gotcha question. He wasn't looking for a substantive discussion on what policies were necessary to get us out of the recession at the time. Donaldson was trying to get Reagan to use his bully pulpit to admit the recession he inherited from Jimmy Carter was his fault. That knowledge helped Reagan respond by taking Donaldson's premise and strangling him with it. Essentially, Reagan said, fine, Sam, you want me to accept blame for what big government does to stifle capitalism and free enterprise? Sure. I guess I should probably accept some of that blame for all the years I used to be a big government Democrat advocating these same failed policies myself. That, my friends, is what the kids today refer to as a walk-off shot or a mic drop. It's as automatic as Mariano Rivera coming out of the bullpen for the New York Yankees in the ninth inning to close the game. The crowd knows it's safe to head out early and get the jump on the Bronx Zoo on the way home. Good night and drive home safely. Unfortunately, most of my fellow grassroots patriots reading this are painfully aware that we have so few potential champions today capable of duplicating these examples. In a soundbite-driven society like ours, the ability to be pithy and potent while trying to persuade others to your principles is pivotal. Folks don't give you 30 minutes to make your case today. They barely give you 30 seconds. Since we communicate in such a quick-draw style these days, it is imperative that we are quick on the draw in the arena of ideas. Whether it's a grassroots patriot standing up at a local Tea Party rally, one of our elected officials or candidates on a national stage, or just a conversation about politics between you and your neighbor, if you can't instantly grab the people's attention and make your case, they just move on. People are used to getting their news from Drudge's compilation of headlines and often don't read the actual article's length, or don't read beyond the first couple of paragraphs if they do. Instead of letters, we communicate with our family via Facebook status updates and with our friends in 140 characters or less on Twitter. Furthermore, the other side of the debate has already boiled down their positions to emotion-driven cliches that are easy to embed into the subconscious of our fellow Americans, i.e., a woman's right to choose, government investment, marriage equality, income equality, fairness, diversity, standing up for the middle class, etc. It's easier to communicate emotion in a pithy fashion than it is logic and reason, which is often what we base our positions on, so we're already at a disadvantage. That's why we need to be intentional about equipping one another to communicate in a way that resonates with how most of our fellow Americans receive and distribute information. One of the most effective methods of doing just that is to master the art of reversing the premise of our opponent's argument and using it against them. Let me provide a couple more examples from my own experience. I once did a TV interview where I sat in a chair and the host had 3 minutes to ask me anything that he wanted. This reoccurring segment was designed to put newsmakers on the defensive by forcing us to answer awkward or in-your-face questions off the cuff. I figured since I get to do this to newsmakers all the time, it's only fair that I put myself on the hot seat for a change. Since I'm not shy about airing my worldview, the host was aware of my socially conservative views, so he went for the jugular right away. Do you have any gay family members or friends, he asked. Now, this is the kind of question that normally makes us cringe after one of our so-called champions is asked something like this by the liberal media. The premise of the question is that people determine the moral standard, and not the moral standard itself. So if I have family members and friends who are same-sex attracted, and I live and let live with them, why don't I do this for others? After all, what's wrong with two people loving each other, right? Except I never accepted the premise of his question, and instead I turned it around on him. All of my friends and everyone in my family are either male or female, I told him. He looked puzzled and repeated his question. Everybody I know is male or female, I said. I'm not aware of a third variation of the human species, but if you discovered one, I'd get the patent on that research quick-like, because I'm guessing there's some money to be made there. At this point, it became clear he'd never run into anybody capable of doing this before, and was used to being the one framing the argument. Left with no liberal cliches to rely upon, he had to just come right out and say it now. Is anybody you know or care about currently having sex with someone of the same gender? He awkwardly asked. First, by never accepting his premise, I have forced him to accept mine, which is our gender is predetermined at birth, no matter what our desires and preferences are. Therefore, gender identity and sexual orientation are just Orwellian talking points devised to distract us from what we're really talking about here. Who someone wants to have sex with and how they want to have sex with them. This isn't about any virtue higher than men having sex with men and women having sex with women, despite the fact the anatomy of each makes that rather difficult on its own because the parts weren't designed to work that way. In addition, by making him ask his question this way, it looks like he's the one on a witch hunt and not me. Most Americans, regardless of political persuasion, have wrongly privatized sexual ethics. I heard from several people who saw the interview how they couldn't believe he was butting his nose into my private business like that. While I don't agree with that premise, I'm certainly more than willing to reverse it and use it against him. And when I did so, I went in for the kill. I don't make it a habit of calling my friends and family members and asking them who they had sex with last night, I said, as if their private sexual behavior was none of my business. Like Bill Paxton said in the movie Aliens, game over, man! The entire faulty premise of the homosexual agenda is that what two consenting adults are doing in their bedroom is of no business to anybody else. In reality, the motto of this movement is, you will be made to care. That's why they make it our business by invading the public policy arena, demanding validation for their private bedroom behavior in a manner that compels the rest of us to alter our morality and religious freedom to accommodate them. By forcing the interviewer to pester me to the point he had no choice but to abandon the liberal talking points and invade my family's privacy, I had reversed his faulty premise and used it against him. Even better, this all happened in less than 90 seconds, so it kept everyone's attention. After the interview, Dick Bott of Bott Radio Network, a legend in Christian broadcasting, called me to tell me that was about the best defense of our belief system in 3 minutes he'd ever seen. I was faced with a similar situation on another issue during a nationally televised interview I did during the 2012 presidential primary. I was challenged by the interviewer with how I, as a Christian, could talk about grace and love while at the same time argue to end government programs to help the poor and needy. Again, this is the sort of question that all too often the Mitt McCains and George McDoles face from the national media that produces that cringe-inducing response. But if you have a solid worldview, it's like sitting on a fastball with a 3-1 count. I think grace and love are measured in a culture not by how many people are in need of government assistance, but by how many people no longer do, I said. What can be more loving than encouraging your fellow man, created in the image of God, that with the right training, tools, and opportunity, they can rise above their circumstances and fulfill their God-given potential? There was no follow-up question after that. If the welfare state really meant compassion, then how come Democrats aren't bragging about the fact there are currently more Americans on food stamps than the population of Spain? Shouldn't they be thanking the taxpayers for all this compassion? Shouldn't they be holding press junkets to boast their plan is working and we're the most compassionate society we've ever been? Instead of screaming, swearing, and throwing things at the TV while Republicrats roll over and play dead for the liberal media, we'd be standing and applauding if more conservatives in the spotlight said things like this more often. Remember when Newt Gingrich got a standing ovation at the 2012 South Carolina primary debate when he turned the tables just like that on Fox News' Juan Williams? Now, one of the most devastating ways to deploy premise reversal is with the use of humor, especially of the snarky variety. I will often use stories going viral as an opportunity to hoist the left from its own petard. Case in point is the strange tale of Raymond Foley. The 59-year-old Foley was charged with, get this, chair wetting. After hours at work, he was urinating on the chairs of the women he found attractive. In response to this story, I opened my show one night with this monologue. Raymond Foley is a victim. Sure, in past eras far less enlightened and tolerant as this current gilded age, Foley might be considered a menace to society, a creep even. But we know better now, don't we? We know people just can't control their urges, and to demand otherwise is a Neanderthal concept right out of the Stone Age. Foley was born with something that compels him to act out in ways some segments of our society, still clinging to their guns and religion, condemn. But what Foley doesn't need is judgment. Foley needs understanding. Foley, 59, was recently charged with second-degree mischief for simply being who he is. Who is Foley? Foley is a chair wetter. According to police in Iowa, Foley was looking up his fellow females employees in the Farm Bureau company database. If he found the woman attractive, he would then go to her desk after hours and urinate on her empty chair. For months, several female employees were complaining about a strange scent emanating from their chairs. Eventually, it was discovered the smell was that of urine, and the urine was Foley's. Once forced to come out of the closet, Foley clearly felt like the weight of the world had been lifted off his shoulders because he voluntarily surrendered to police. No longer having to hide who he is, Foley is willing to accept responsibility for his admittedly odd actions. We can only hope that Foley will simultaneously seek to raise awareness of them as well. That's because Foley is just the most high-profile example of the latest progressive form of self-expression. Foley, like an increasing number of Americans, has discovered that he has a urination orientation. Shamed by society, folks like Foley have been forced to act on their urges in the shadows. Whether it's urinating on empty chairs or perhaps overindulging their senses via depictions of urinations on adult websites, Foley and others like him are being denied their right to urinate. It is, after all, the way they were made. All of us have the desire to urinate. It's part of our base nature. But where does someone else get off, so to speak, telling someone else what form that urination must take? Or even where that urination must take place? Laws that deny public expression of urination are just another example of the government regulating what we do with our own bodies. Until these laws are repealed, and people like Foley affirmed in their right to urinate on whichever consenting adult or inanimate object they choose, none of us can trust our rights will be defended. For if one group is denied their freedom, then it's just a matter of time before straight shooters, slang for those who prefer to urinate into toilets, or on them, depending on their aim, they'll also be threatened. Some of you are sure to be offended by what Foley has done, but how dare you judge Foley until you've walked a mile in his shoes, or spent some time sitting in his chair? Besides, someone cannot change the way they were born, thus it's not right to shun Foley simply for acting on his nature. The chairs were empty, remember, and surely the urine dried by the time the women returned to work the next morning. Foley wasn't doing anything that harmed anybody else, and it's not like you can spread some disease via airborne urine. If that reasoned argument doesn't persuade you, then answer this simple question. How has Foley being able to act on his urination orientation negatively impacted your urination? If it hasn't impeded your stream of consciousness, so to speak, then what Foley is doing is none of your business, and you should urinate when and where you choose and permit Foley to do the same. Granted, the chairs Foley was urinating on were someone else's property, but that's simply because neither his employer nor the government provided the means by which Foley could properly apply his urination orientation. If Foley had access to chairs pretty girls once set in to urinate on, he wouldn't have to urinate on the chairs he actually did. That's not even addressing the fact that if the government doesn't provide Foley chairs to urinate in, he'll continue doing it after hours in chairs that could be faulty. Faulty chairs may collapse, thus putting Foley in jeopardy. We don't want people being harmed by collapsing chairs in back hallways, do we? That's exactly why the state ought to be providing those chairs for Foley and others like him. It could potentially save lives, not to mention some chairs, which is good for the environment. Then the state should make sure the next generation of kids in our schools doesn't succumb to the same intolerance and lack of diversity towards urination orientation that their fundamentalist parents and grandparents have victimized folks like Foley with. Furthermore, the company Foley used to work for should not only give him his job back, but also provide employees such as Foley a urination station to be utilized when the urge strikes. Of course, adding language to the company diversity curriculum, informing Foley's coworkers of the vital necessity of recognizing urination orientation in the workplace, and the important contributions to society urinators have made throughout human history, think of how many people in history have been bedwetters, for example, should be immediate actions any good corporate citizen would immediately agree to. Given the fact a company like Farm Bureau would prefer to avoid looking like an agent of intolerance in the media, I'm confident it will do exactly that. Some of you reading this will bristle at recognizing both the normalcy and necessity of people like Foley being affirmed and accepted for just being who they are, but many of you also bristled at things 20 years ago you're readily accepting now. Nevertheless, even if those questioning or struggling with their urination orientation aren't accepted by your generation, rest assured they will be by your children once we're through enlightening them. Soon you will see more urination in your classrooms, and all of the best and most likable characters on your most popular television shows will urinate freely on screen. We'll even have clergy arguing that the Bible affirms urination in all of its forms. And we'll have a pioneer like Foley to thank for that. Who knows, maybe Sean Penn will even play the part of Foley in his biopic one day. D.L. Moody once said, "When you win some, you win some." In addition, there's an old saying which goes, "What the devil hates most of all is to be mocked." In one of my all-time favorite movies, Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, Captain Kirk gets his nemesis Khan to lose his cool and manipulates him into a trap by saying, "Khan, I'm laughing at your superior intellect." Making fun of the foolishness of the left's magical thinking by using their own premises against them wins people over to our side and also diminishes their credibility. Beyond the obvious double standard that exists, one of the reasons why liberal comedians get away with being more vicious than conservative commentators is because people find them funny. People let you absolutely annihilate your opponent if you make them laugh while you're doing it. What I have learned doing talk radio is that when I only go after our opponents using harsh language, I can at times offend even those who agree with me. But if I use humor, almost everybody gives me permission to be vicious, provided it's funny. If you make them laugh, it's almost as if the public gives you permission to swing away. But to be able to use humor and snark, that effectively requires an inner joy. And that inner joy comes from only a deep, abiding faith that, no matter what, God is still on the throne. The more I've grown in my faith, the more I believe my heavenly daddy can beat up their earthly daddy. The more I believe my daddy can beat up their daddy, the more peace I have about the future. The more peace I have about the future, the easier it is for me to relax and not always react emotionally. The easier it is for me to relax and not always react emotionally, the easier it is for me to find the humor or joy in all but the most tragic of circumstances. And the more I can use humor to make my point, the more likely I will get my point across. People ask me all the time how it seems like we're having so much fun chronicling the fall of Western civilization on the radio. And I take that question as a compliment. Proving the emperor has no clothes doesn't just defeat your enemy, it depants them. The reason men like William F. Buckley, C.S. Lewis, and G.K. Chesterton are so often quoted is because they had the wisdom and wit to rhetorically remove their opponent's still beating heart from his chest and show it to everybody with one skillful turn of a phrase. That doesn't mean there's not a time and place for passion and or righteous indignation. Heck, I could probably title my radio program Righteous Indignation some nights. I come to work each night with the jawbone of an ass and a whip of cords ready to go. But if I really believe in the God of providence expressed in the final verse of our national anthem, there's no reason to be so uptight and antsy all the time. Incessant hand-wringing is not a heavenly virtue. Besides, if folks don't want to do what's right, the eternal accountability they'll face from God is far more lethal and terrifying than anything I have the power to devise this side of eternity anyway. Just kick the dust off your sandals / cowboy boots and move on. By all means, never stop clinging to your guns and your Bibles, but there's no need to do so bitterly. Let's engage in one more exercise in reversing the premise and use the hot-button issue of illegal immigration to do it. In a clear attempt to pander for Hispanic votes during the 2012 presidential campaign, President Obama unilaterally enacted amnesty for illegals by refusing to enforce the law, see that as violate his oath of office, in cases involving 880,000 illegal aliens. Now notice I didn't accept the premise they're undocumented immigrants any more than a carjacking is an undocumented repossession. One of the arguments frequently used by amnesty advocates like Obama, and even some misguided Christian leaders who don't have a theological leg to stand on by agreeing with him, was that it's not fair to penalize children for the mistakes of their parents. Except if this was really and only about fairness and not punishing kids for the mistakes of their parents, then why do we have borders at all? There are plenty of children suffering throughout the world for circumstances they had nothing to do with. So why don't we bring all of them here and give all of them access to the welfare state? See that as your productivity and prosperity. Why is it fair for middle-class Americans to buy a 70-inch television set with so much suffering in the world? Shouldn't the government cap television purchases at 42 inches and redistribute the rest of the wealth to fight global poverty? Come to think of it, who really even needs a 42-inch television set, or television at all, for that matter? Is it fair that First Lady Michelle Obama wore a $1,000 skirt on a trip to Hawaii in 2011? Shouldn't she have bought a cheaper skirt at Walmart and given the rest of the money to feed the children, which says $1 per day feeds 8 hungry children in the United States? How many children starved because Mrs. Obama spent $1,000 on a skirt instead of $24.99? During the 2013 government shutdown, and how can something be shut down when it's still operating at 83% capacity is beyond me, but we learned when many of them were furloughed that Michelle Obama had a record number of paid staff for a first lady. Did Michelle Obama really need 24 taxpayer-funded staff members? When as recently as Mamie Eisenhower, the first lady had to pay for her loan assistant out of her own pocket? How many illegals have to remain living in the shadows so that Michelle Obama can get her nails done? And while we're at it, why is it fair to cap the fairness at kids whose parents successfully arrived here illegally? Where do we get off not providing fairness to the children of parents who haven't been able to illegally and successfully cross our borders? Not to mention, what about all the Latinos and other minorities currently waiting in line to immigrate to this country legally? Why is it fair to bypass all of them? In less than a few hundred words, I was able to pose several easily understandable questions that reverse the liberals' premise and use it against them, including citing 3 examples of their own politicians to reinforce my point. What is more likely to persuade our fellow Americans to our side? The tactics I am suggesting, or the boring and contrived talking points our guys usually regurgitate over and over again to the already converted on Fox News? Humor can even be used to reverse the left's premise on an issue as divisive and potentially hostile as the debate over the definition of marriage. In 2013, I wrote a column for USA Today attacking those for redefining marriage as being hypocrites. I wrote, "Those arguing for marriage equality at the U.S. Supreme Court this week should be ashamed of themselves. They're just as guilty of discrimination as those dastardly conservatives still bitterly clinging to their guns and their religion. Why no argument for polygamy, polyamory, and other forms of diversity? Why are they only defending their exclusive definition of diversity? How dare those seeking to overturn the Defense of Marriage Act signed by President Clinton or Proposition 8 ratified by the people of California stop at just redefining marriage to include 2 consenting adults of the same gender? Why do these people believe they have the authority to draw a moralistic line against any consenting adults and thus force their moral standard upon the rest of us? Besides, society's views on these other progressive forms of relationship diversity are shifting. And shouldn't we always base our concept of right and wrong off of what we see on TV, just like our gender-neutral maternal units taught us? Who better to consult on moral matters than the huddled masses that paid money to see all those Saw and Hostel movies? For example, there is a popular reality show on basic cable called Sister Wives about the lost art of polygamy. Showtime is airing a trailblazing show on the multiple wedded bliss of polyamory. Oh sure, Showtime also features a series with a creepy old dude watching 1970s porn with Z-list celebrities as well, but who are we to judge? Why would those seeking to redefine marriage to include homosexual monogamy play right into the hands of those draconian religious fundamentalists who think they and their alleged God have the authority to narrowly define love among consenting adults? Why aren't those arguing for marriage equality being inclusive by including marriage among multiple consenting adults as well? Besides, polygamy is in the Bible, no less. Abraham, David, and Solomon are just some of that dusty old book's heroes who were polygamists. No member of the American Taliban can claim their puny God destroyed a whole city over polygamy, so why not be more inclusive? If the government has no power to discriminate against relationships involving 2 consenting adults of the same gender, then why does it have the power to discriminate against multiple consenting adults of any gender? Next thing you know, we'll be back to banning interracial dating. If we're truly champions of diversity, it's time to embrace polygamy, polyamory, or multiple marriage. What better way for children to learn about different cultures and belief systems than to grow up around them in their own families? Imagine children being born into a household where each dad has a different religion, each mom speaks a different language, and then sometimes the dads are attracted to one another as well as the moms, and vice versa. Talk about covering all your bases. What a richness of blessed diversity could be found in such an endeavor. It's time for the marriage equality movement to stop being hypocrites and cease practicing its own form of discrimination, and to stop compromising with pro-marriage bigots. Take a principled stand. Either all of us get to do whatever we want with as many whomevers as we want, or none of us are equal.
And that was Chapter 6 of Rules for Patriots, How Conservatives Can Win Again by Steve Deese. Back in a minute. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there, and reminding you that you are not neutral and that the government has no rights.
It is Ryan Seacrest here. There was a recent social media trend which consisted of flying on a plane with no music, no movies, no entertainment. But a better trend would be going to ChumbaCasino.com. It's like having a mini social casino in your pocket. Chumba Casino has over 100 online casino-style games, all absolutely free. It's the most fun you can have online and on a plane. So grab your free welcome bonus now at ChumbaCasino.com. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
No